Clive Palmer was once named the richest man in Australia. He has billions of dollars in assets in property and mining. He has private planes, a $60 million super yacht, thousands of collectible cars, and at age 71, he doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. I'm here to interview Clive to see how he went from middle class to billionaire. Clive, welcome to the Trillions podcast.
That's good to be here. I went from lower class to... I don't have to get much about your class. It's just the content of your character is what's more important. It's not about how much money you've got in life. It's the principles that guide you and how you operate. And unfortunately today, even in my business career, a lot of people don't stick with those principles. They're interested in doing things for money. And of course, that means you can easily be controlled and the people define what you're after. One of my successes has been I've never done things for money. I've done it because I think it's the right thing to do. And that gives me a lot of strength. It means I can persevere in deals, not do the wrong thing, not take shortcuts, and ultimately be successful.
We're sitting here on your 56-metre super yacht Australia here on the Gold Coast, which is where you made your first millions. But as a kid, you actually travelled to China and you were there for 6 months. What were you doing in China?
Well, it was a time when Chairman Mao had one of his 5-year plans, and there was a great famine in China. And we were over there. I think my father was sort of there on a secret mission, really, to see how we could get Australian wheat and that to alleviate some of the problems. One of the things with that ANZUS was you had Australia, New Zealand and the United States in a treaty. It was a time of the Cold War. But our Prime Minister then, Robert Menzies, was still a very Christian person. He didn't like the idea of hundreds of millions of Chinese starving. And I think that was one of the reasons that my dad went over there, because a lot of Eastern countries were trying to buy food from Australia to ship to China. And I think it was a sensitive thing for the Americans and the Alliance whether we did that, because China wasn't recognised by anyone. So we caught a slow boat to Dalian in China.
You didn't take a plane?
No, we couldn't take a plane. We drove up to Beijing, and we spent 3 or 4 months with the Chinese. I met Chairman Mao while I was there as a little kid, but it was good to go there to China because there's so many people there. And I always remember the young children. We used to sit around a fireplace and have a hot pot at night and sing songs. I could learn to sing songs in Chinese, but I didn't know what they meant. I could still learn that it was really, really good. It contrasts a lot with China of recent times, where people are more interested in money and are less interested in conversation, discussion, and appreciating other individuals.
Mm. Yeah, China's definitely an interesting place.
Yeah.
What was one of your key takeaways from China back then as a kid? Obviously, you were under the age of 10 when you went?
I would have been about 8, I think, right? I think that the main takeaway was to realise that there are other human beings living in China that are like us, that we've all got the same needs. We all need love and affection, recognition. We all need to be appreciated by each other. And we shouldn't be so quick to condemn people. Because I went in there, my dad went in there, I guess, with the idea too that all these are communists and they're the baddies. It was a day of good and bad. And as my life progresses, you see there is no real good and bad, right? There's different cultures, there's different ways that people look at things. And we've really got to try to understand where they're coming from and say, how would I feel if I was in that position?
Definitely, and you've come a long way since then. It's estimated that your net worth is around 20 billion now. Did you ever go to university?
Yeah, I did go to university, but I was going to university. I was pretty poor. I was sleeping on the floor of a share house at St Lucia. I think I had to pay $15 a week rent at those times.
Which college was it?
Union College. Now, Union College was... I did stay at Union College for a while, but that was a different story, right? but at this particular time, I was sleeping on the house on the floor. I didn't have a mattress for a while. I remember I had to save up and get a mattress, but that was the days when Gough Whitlam paid you about $25 a week to be a student, right? So I was living in poverty, but it wasn't too bad, It's certainly something that gives you an inner strength later on to realise that money's illusion, really, that the main things in life really are to have someone that loves you, a warm bed and a good meal. At the age of 19 or so, I was sort of against the idea of working. I didn't want to work. I thought it would be good to have an easy life, I could live on the dole, that wasn't too bad. Sleeping on the floor wasn't bad, that'd be good. But then I met a girl, right? And she was working at the university, and I thought I wanted to take her out. But I realised I didn't have any money. So she became my motivation to say, well, how am I going to get some money to take her out for dinner? So over the holidays, I read an ad in the paper for a real estate company, right? That was recruiting people to sell real estate. I thought, well, real estate's pretty easy. They're all big fat guys with white shoes. They don't do much anyway. So I'll go and work for that. And it had $200 a week retainer, which was a lot of money. I said, $200 a week retainer. I can take her out for dinner, really impress her, you know. And anyway, so I thought I'd go, and so I rang up and I said, oh, hello, I'm ringing about the ad. And he said, how old are you? I said, 19. He said, sorry, you only want people over 30. Goodbye, and hung up on me, right? I thought, what an injustice. You know, when you're young, you think you shouldn't be discriminated because you're young. So I remember I said, hello, I'm 32 and I'd like to come in for a job interview. So then I went in for a job interview, right? I got the job, right? And so I started out, I had to go through a training system. I learnt this training system on how to sell real estate. I didn't know how to sell real estate. That's all I knew. So then they put me out and I always followed the system. The first month I made about $200,000, I think it was, in sales, in commissions, right? Which is a lot of sales, you know. And then I went on, and over about 3 months I would have made about $500,000 selling, you see. And my mother and father were very disappointed in me because I was doing arts at university and I was changing to law. And my friends were all graduating and they said, Clive, you're a failure. You know, you in life you've got to get back and get a degree and get some recognition. I said, okay. So they said, you have to resign from this position. So I did. So I went in, and the day I got in there, the managing director of the firm was up from Sydney. And they called me in his office with the state manager and he said, now Clive, he said, we're very happy with the results. You've got a really extraordinary, best salesman in Australia. He said, but we're a bit worried about your age.
Did they know about it at this point?
No. I said, what do you mean, my age? So straight away it flashed in my mind, we're going to have to give all this money back. I'll never get, you know, I'll lose my girlfriend. I'll lose everything. My life's falling apart. Just that one second I had that thought. But they said, because at 32, you'll be our youngest state manager in Australia. We're just promoting you to run the whole Queensland division. And in that, they were selling like $200 million worth of real estate, I suppose, in Queensland a year, which wasn't like an agent. It was their actual property sort of thing. And we were advising all of the major banks. So I was stuck with a dilemma, you know. Did I tell him I was 19 or did I say I was 32? I said, well, I didn't know. I just couldn't work it out. You know, when you're younger, you don't want to make difficult decisions. So I just that was on a Friday. So I had to arrive in there on the Monday and take all the meetings as the new CEO for that area. And they had about like 30 guys there that were very experienced, up to about 50 or 60, I suppose. And they'd been in real estate for 20 or 30 years sort of stuff. So they then announced that I was the new CEO, and all those guys wanted to be CEO. A lot of them, I didn't know the politics of it. And this guy got up and he said, I've been in real estate for 30 years. He said, I've forgotten more than you'd ever know. I thought, probably true. I said, I've been in real estate for 5 months, but I haven't forgotten anything. Right? And then they started challenging me. And one of the critical things in the sales thing was that you couldn't ring clients, because you couldn't sign up a client if you rang him. You had to get the decision makers together and then do your close. See, that's a critical thing to learn in anything you do in business. So these people, being lazy, fat salesmen, wanted to ring people and not have to go and see them. They wanted to change that rule. So the first thing they said, we need to change the rule so we can ring and telephone people, save time. And I said, no, look, the reason you can't do that is because you're not skilled enough. Now, if it was me, of course, I could do that. I could get a result instantly, but you can't, and that's why I'm here and you're there. And they go, oh, that's a bit rough. You know, I said, well, if you don't believe me, I said, let's have an experiment. I said, you guys go out, look up for doctors, engineers, and just ring them up and try to get an appointment to come and see them. I'll give you 30 minutes to get an appointment. None of you will get an appointment because you're hopeless. I said, then come back and give me the next person on the list and I'll show you how you do it, right? And then you'll realize that's why I've got the job. That's why you've got to do what I tell you, right? So they went out there for 30 minutes. They rang everyone up. I had my secretary with them to make sure they didn't cheat, right? And they didn't get a result. And they all came back and formed a circle and they all looked at me. And although they'd failed, they're all smiling. They're all smiling so much because they're waiting for me to fail too. But I didn't want to fail. I wanted to succeed. So I rang up this guy, Dr. Wilson. I said, hello, Dr. Wilson. I said, one of your colleagues suggested I should call you because are you interested in making a lot of money? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, right. So can I come around tonight at 7:30? I knew it was the time they'd just be having dinner. When you're sitting down with your wife and talk to both of you together about this opportunity. He said, I'm sorry. We'll be having dinner at that time. And that's what I knew. But as soon as he said that, the whole room lit up. They were all happy. right? Because he thought I'd failed. I said, good, can I tell you a little bit about it now? He said, sure, go ahead. I said, good, I'll be down in 5 minutes. So I went down, saw the doctor, took him out in the morning and sold him a block of land, right? That sort of taught me at that stage it's important not to be frightened in situations, to be able to lead by example, and not to get other people to do things that you couldn't do yourself, right? So we went on in that role for a number of years, and I probably made about $40 million or $30 million, no, about $30 million in that time. And then
by age 29,
I
wasn't it?
it would have been 23 at that stage, 24, because I started at 19. My mother and father were upset, because I'd failed. My peers had all gone to uni and graduated by that stage and were first year lawyers and stuff, and who was I? I only studied for 2 years. So mum and dad said, you've got to go back to uni now and put something behind you. But I thought, silly maybe, that 30 or 40 million was something I had behind me. But anyway, so I was going to go back. So I went in there and I told them I was going to resign because I wanted to make my mum happy like all children do, right? So when I told them I was going to resign, that then went out to all of the major finance companies and banks and things like that, right? Telling them that. And they all invited me out for dinner, to a send-off. And then they told me that they were going to give me a lot of money to start my own company, to only work with them exclusively, and I'd make a lot more money.
You started that company with the assistance of everybody who encouraged you, and that was called GCC Sales?
It was. That was part of it, but
and
that was the girl I went out with. Her father was a real estate agent, and I was able to use his thing. That was one company that we started right then. But
major development on the Gold Coast at this time. You were selling the properties that were being developed. Is that correct?
On the Gold Coast in Brisbane at that time, say 1974, 75, the real estate market was flat. There'd been large investments. They were large in those days. They're still large today, I suppose, a couple of $100 million here and there, and they couldn't sell any land, right? So we had to take it over. And then we started and we sold it all, and then we charged 5 times the commission because we were specialists, right? Mm-hmm. To do these things. So I suppose I would have made about 40 or 50 million when I decided to give it about 50 or 60 probably to give it to go, to leave, sort of thing, right? So then I started 3 different businesses off, right? One in oil, one in mineral exploration, right? And another one, I forgot what it was. Yeah, it was in research and development, right? Yeah. And I thought, well, one of those must be successful, right? But they all ended up being successful. Mm-hmm. So then I had to sell them off and unfortunately make more money. Because when you make money, you've got a responsibility to deploy it.
Take us back to 74 when you joined the National Party, and then in 1983 you became campaign manager. What drew you into politics when you were so young?
Well, the same girl that drew me into work, because she lived at a place called Jindawi in Western Queensland, and Bob Sparks, who was a sort of controller of the National Party, I guess, lived there too, right? And they were family friends, sort of thing. So, I thought I'd do that. And one of the big things everyone said, you can't help university students. University students will never support the National Party. They're completely anti-national. I said, that's not right. I said, with the right approach, we can do pretty well. So I said this to the people in the National Party. I said, okay, so we'll start a young National Party movement up, right? And I had all these friends at college because, from football, from a whole range of things I did at that time. So we started to have a meeting. So I asked them, and some of these girls that were in these camps, I got 400 people to come to a meeting. And they thought there'd be about 4. And all these senators and everyone came in, wow! Suddenly, 400 people, none of them were nationals. They're all the Labor people came, but they're all friends.
How did you get them to show up? Because 400 people is a massive turnout.
Well, I got them to show up because I was a bit of a character. They knew me as a person, and they just did it as a favour, a lot of them, So
what was the meeting about?
Well, it was setting up a branch at the National Party, and of course...
Did the people attending know that?
Yeah, they knew that, but they still come and help me. But the point about it was, four original people turned up that we didn't invite. I couldn't believe it. which was from Union College, which was from King's College, and they were all doing divinity. I said, oh shit, So anyway, they thought it was a ridgy-didge meeting, so I had to sit there. And then they had to nominate people for president, so I got nominated, and one of their guys nominated him. And I won 400 to 3. Very impressive politically, right? So this was fun. So I just had done that. Then they gave me a job working in the National Party headquarters for a couple of weeks. So that was good. But anyway, that's just another story, really. And then I resigned as chairman, so I could go back and do my study
Yeah.
and my pursuit of love. Because you're very tender at that age. I was about 18 then, I think. So
You didn't finish university.
no,
You did a certificate in law or something like,
no,
and
I
that was
didn't
your
finish,
first gig?
but I did become a professor. I was a professor like years later. Deakin University needed someone that had done international finance and trading and knew how things worked internationally, which at that time I did, right? So they asked me to come down to lecture for their postgraduates doing their MBA in their business. I did that for about 3 years, and then they had a vote in the university who was the most popular lecturer, which I was, right? And I then got invited to be a adjunct professor at the university. They made me a professor.
That's nice.
Then they made me a full professor after that.
Do you think university is necessary for somebody to succeed in life?
I think it's necessary to have a laissez-faire exchange of ideas, right? That's what's really necessary. And I think universities at that time did have that necessary exchange of ideas. That's changed a lot now because now they're dependent on actual revenue from overseas. They've got to make sure that people can graduate a lot easier because they don't want their mum and dads to pay 3 times the amount Australians pay and then find out they failed. Who would come next time? So now university standards around the country are not what they used to be.
Access to information is a lot easier now, so it makes sense that university is not required as
Well,
much.
it's good to have access to the internet, but it's also,
Let's go back to your Gold Coast days and the property days
yeah.
real quick. So Joe Bjelke-Petersen was in government. Did you benefit from the corrupt government at the time?
I think all Queenslanders benefited. We're sitting here on the Gold Coast now. We can see some of the benefits, because one of the things Joe used to do was he wanted to see the Gold Coast develop. And he wanted to have high-rise buildings, and the local councils didn't want to do it, primarily because a lot of developers had different factions in the council. So he put the councils into administration, and he could then approve high-rise buildings. And we had, like, you can see what the Gold Coast has become, right?
It's Queensland's major tourist destination.
That's right. So that was a good decision. But I remember back it would be 1980, 1982 or something, 3, talking to Joe, and we're being attacked a lot, because I used to advise him on things. We're being attacked a lot in Parliament about always approving these things for developers, right? So I said to Joe, I said, don't you think we're just doing a little bit too many? Why shouldn't we stop for a while and not do something? He said, no. I said, why? I said, they'll all go broke. He said, all these developers, Joe said, will go broke. I said, what? He said, they'll go broke. There's too many of them. We've created too many units. They're going to go broke, and the price of units will go down, and they'll be able to rent them very cheaply. I said, that's not a good thing. You don't want developers to go broke, Joe. Everyone thinks you're doing it to help developers. He said, no, I'm doing it to help Queensland. I said, how does that help Queensland? He said, well, you think about it, Clive. He said, every one that's built is 15,000 jobs for Queenslanders in building them and constructing them. He said, secondly, if we have an oversupply of buildings, which we do have, rentals will be cheaper. So people will be able to come to the Gold Coast and rent a unit for their family from Sydney and Melbourne and have a cheaper holiday anywhere else in the world. If you're in Europe, he said, you've got to go to Monaco, you go to a place like that, it's going to cost you $10,000 a week. It's for elites.
It's very strategic.
It's for elites. So I'm creating, he said, the biggest tourist industry in Australia, and it's going to be really good for Queensland. He said, if developers want to do it and they want to take a financial risk, if the bank wants to support them, who am I to stop them? He said, who am I to stop them? We've decided that the Gold Coast is going to be the area for high-rise buildings. It's going to be on that strip. And that, so be it. Doesn't matter what they say. And of course, he was right. The developers did go broke, and the cost of getting a unit here on the beach for your family for a week's about 1/10 of what it would be in Europe, right? So, not many people realise that.
He really helped pioneer the growth of the Gold Coast, even down to the theme parks that we've got here were part of his
he
vision.
rezoned the theme parks, but also, you got to remember, he became Premier of Queensland when Lyndon Johnson was President of the United States. It's a long time ago, right? And at that time, we had enormous deposits of coal, and we didn't have a port to export the coal. We didn't have a railway, and nobody would build it. The federal government wouldn't do it. Joe went out and built the port, built the railway, and whether you're for or against coal, we're the biggest exporters of coal in the world. And if we didn't have that as exports here in Queensland, the state government revenue would be half. We'd have half the schools, half the police officers, that sort of thing. So all these things are important. But with Joe, the main thing I got from Joe was faith. He was a person of great faith, and he believed in God. And every day he would get up and he would say that he'd read the Bible for at least 2 hours in the morning. And he was a completely honest person. It's not to say that some people in his government weren't dishonest, but he wasn't, right? And that was the most important thing. And he's one of the few people that I know that went to federal or state parliament that never took a pension, never had superannuation, because he thought he didn't deserve it if he was serving the people. So when he retired, he didn't retire with $2 or $3 million at that time or anything like that. He retired with nothing because he thought it was an honour to serve people.
Did your business benefit directly from that government and what
No,
was going on?
no, we didn't benefit at all. Nothing. We benefited nothing really. But as I said, it did benefit because we all benefited because Queensland grew, and there were people coming up from Sydney and Melbourne that to retire here with their money, and that created more demand. And it's my business did benefit, everyone's did benefit in that general sense. And I was interviewed in the Fitzgerald inquiry. I remember that. I had two guys come over the Fitzgerald inquiry, the massive detectives, about 6'6". They sat in my office to me and they said, "Mr. Palmer, can you identify this chip?" It was like a ticket you get for buying a hamburger or something, I said, "Yes, it's a ticket for a hamburger and a ticket for a milkshake." They said, "Did you have a hamburger and a milkshake with the Minister for Health at Expo?" I said, "Yeah, I did. I'm guilty." I said, "Right." I said, "She bought it." He said, "We're not suggesting you did anything wrong by eating the hamburger or drinking the drink." He said, "But we want to know if the Minister bought it." He said, "Was there a good reason for her buying it?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Because I was talking to her about and advising her about policy on how we should develop our hospitals." And they said, "Okay." He said, "What about this?" They passed the document to me. That was the appointment of a guy to be chairman of the QIDC, which is a government medical thing. And what had happened there was that they were going to appoint a guy called David Russell, who was a business barrister who was on the state executive of the National Party. And the minister rang me and she said she didn't think she should appoint him. And he said, "And we know the minister rang you, and we know that you advised her not to appoint him, and you advised him to appoint this other guy, Noel Sullivan. Are you guilty of that? Why did you do that?" I said, "Well, because that guy was on the National Party executive." I said, "Wouldn't it be a good look?" And he wasn't competent. He was a barrister. I said, "The guy, Neil Sullivan, was a member of the Labor Party. He was a former secretary of the CSIRO, and he's the current chairman." And then I advised them to go back and to tell Mr. Fitzgerald that he shouldn't be spending his late nights with the then Premier, Mike O'Hearn, up the North Coast after 10 o'clock at night, discussing his inquiry before he reports to the government. And then they rang me back and said they won't be coming back to see me anymore.
How did you know that?
What?
How did you know that?
Well, because I've got friends that would
Friends
tell
in
me,
high places.
would tell me what was happening. And I knew that. I thought that was the optimum time to let them know. And you see, what happened in the Fitzgerald inquiry was that, Joe originally had got a lot of complaints about the police, right? And he went to Terry Lewis, who was the commissioner, and gave him those complaints and said, "I want you to thoroughly investigate that." Now, Terry Lewis came back and said there's no corruption in the police force. Later on, it was revealed that Terry Lewis was head of that corruption, right? But then Joe wasn't happy with that. He went to the deputy commissioner and he asked them the same thing. And they came back with the same thing, but he was involved in it too. So Joe did what he thought he needed to do, and he was convinced there was no corruption in the police force. So when he went on holidays, one of my friends, Bill Gunn, who was the deputy premier, had a separate meeting, and we set up the Fitzgerald inquiry to investigate the police. And at that meeting, there were 5 ministers in the cabinet that said they would resign if there wasn't a Fitzgerald inquiry. And one of them was Leisha Harvey, right? It was Gibbs down here, all of them who were very good people. And so they had the inquiry. Now, as the inquiry went on, right, they came across drug dealing and stuff like that, and they didn't want to investigate it. Fitzgerald didn't want to investigate it. So you had a couple of ministers that went down and said, "Oh, well," one guy in particular, Don Lane, went down and he said, "Oh, well, I've rorted the system. I've spent my ministerial expenses as I shouldn't." So then they started, he said, "I can't investigate ministers." So he then gave it to the police. And what did the police do? They focused on those 5 ministers who stood up and made sure there's a Fitzgerald inquiry, and they investigated them, right? And for example, Leisha Harvey, she was a health minister. She used to go down to Adelaide Grand Prix in the government plane, and her husband went down with her, and they said that was corrupt, and she went to jail. And her and her husband detained ministers from other states up here, and she said, "Did you pay for your husband's meal?" And she said, "No." And so she went so they said that was corruption, And she went to jail for 6 months. And Ivan Gibbs, all of them did the same thing to them because the police were getting back at the people that caused the inquiry, right?
But there was a lot more going on. That what about the bribes?
Well, I don't know about bribes, but I do know that a lot of people, a couple of ministers were, had an increased lifestyle, but then they went to jail, those ones, right? But it was just that I think there could have been a more thorough investigation on some of the more serious things, right? That individuals were doing. It wasn't a whole government doing it. It was actually to the credit of those people that stood up in cabinet. It took a lot of courage to make sure that would happen. It'd be very easy to go along with it. And of course, they were all defeated the next election, and they were the ones that went to jail for misdemeanors, I'd say. The Auditor General the following year said that if we judge what those ministers did as being wrong, we'd have to jail everyone in Parliament. Right? That's what he said.
Yeah.
He said that in his report because that wasn't the core thing that you were worried about. What was uncovered was prostitution in the valley, illegal gambling, right? All of that sort of stuff, drug dealing. That was the stuff the inquiry should have concentrated on. They didn't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In the end, they didn't. Right? So I was a bit disappointed. Right? But Queensland's a better state for it. Right?
Yeah, definitely. 60 units in Coolum. You applied for approval for that, denied by council, but later approved by Ross Hinds. Never went ahead.
Well, what happened was...
What happened with that failure?
Let me explain it to you. So we applied for 60 units to be approved, right? And the council rejected it. So we went to the court. We lodged an application. That was going to go through to be heard. My view was they should have always approved it, obviously, right? Because I wouldn't apply it. And what happened? The council approached us and said, can we settle that? We don't want to go to court. So we signed a settlement agreement with them that they would approve it, right? And we would withdraw our legal case. Now, once you sign that settlement agreement, it means that the corporate body of the council is bound by it, right? Because you've approved it. So what happened? It went back to council and they didn't approve it, right? So we said, okay, we're going to sue you under the settlement agreement. And then the government intervened because the government would have been responsible for paying the damages.
You obviously have an affinity for the Sunshine Coast. You also purchased the Coolum Golf Club and Resort, once host to the PGA. What happened with the resort?
It's still there. It's going well. We've just been restoring it all. We're open for golf, right? And I think if you go up there, you'll see how great it is, really. It's probably the premier resort in Australia. We've just built a full-scale version of the Acropolis, right? We've got the Trevi Fountain. It's all been built. These will be coming up. New things. We've renovated all the rooms. I spent a couple $100 million on it all, and it certainly will be really great. So, I had my birthday party there. It was pretty good. So, of course, it was the #1 resort in Australia for many years.
Created a lot of jobs as well.
It did, yeah. So that's all coming back.
Minerology.
Yeah.
You started buying up speculative mining land back in the 80s.
Yeah.
You had no experience in mining.
No.
Why did you choose to get into that? Did you get some kind of tip-off or forecast into the future? How did you know that was worthwhile?
Well, I had a mate rang me up and said that there was this huge iron ore deposit in the Pilbara that he thought was very good. And because of the Vietnam War, the US company was leaving Australia. It was a chance to acquire it. And of course, BHP and Rio weren't interested in magnetite at that stage because they had all these other deposits. So I knew nothing about it, right? But I had a good friend who was a professor of geology at Adelaide University, Peter Yetmar. And I discussed it with him, and he went up and saw it. And he thought it was the premier deposit in the world. It's actually got over 160 billion tons of magnetite ore there. I mean, BHP and Rio together would have maybe 25 billion tons. So it's much bigger than anything that they had. So he said, Clive, this is something you should have. And then I got approached by an engineering firm called Raymond's. They were in Perth. They were one of the biggest engineering firms in the world. They had built the Liberty ships and things like that in the Second World War in the United States. And they had a guy there called Joe Cook-Vara, who was a Czechoslovakian geologist, that he had a contact with the Russians, dare I say it, and that they wanted to get into mining, and they had a big sort of like industrial complex that built mining equipment. So he thought that they would, want to buy it. So I tied it up with an option. I put down about, I think it was $1 million or so as an option to pay for it in 6 months' time. And we got Joe and the engineers, and we went off to Moscow, right? And that was the time Gorbachev was in power, and we met a couple of the ministers in Moscow and all that.
The Russians didn't end up doing the deal with you for that iron ore deposit.
Well,
Instead,
no, I'll tell you what happened. If you've got to be patient if you're a podcaster, but you've got to be patient. So what happened was we then had a 2 weeks, I suppose, of conferences with their ministers and stuff like that, and with their top people. And at the end of it, they said, Mr. Palmer, we'd like to offer you $3 billion worth of cinnamon. I said, what do you mean cinnamon? I said, what's all this about? And that was the time the Bunker Hunt brothers had cornered the world silver market, right? And they said, Comrade Stalin, in 1952, determined that we were very low in production of cinnamon. So he increased production. And then he died the next year. And it's just gone on and on. He said, now we have $3 billion of cinnamon. I said, what would I want $3 billion worth of cinnamon for? He said, well, you could become king of toast throughout the world. You know? So at one time, I had this massive iron ore deposit, and I had my own perception of what I'd be and become. And then I had to flip to become king of toast. I didn't really like to be king of toast, right? So we didn't know what to do. So I said we'd talk to them later. So we left Moscow, and we went back to Perth, right? Now, Joe Kukvara, I asked him to go up to the mines department and just check the title, because we had an option to buy the title off Hannah Mining, which was a US company, and I was meeting that guy that night. You know, he'd flown in to ask what had happened with the Russian trip, when we get our money. And he went up there and he found out that when the Americans left, they'd given the job to one of the accounting firms to pay the rent, and they'd forgot to pay it. So he arrived at sort of 9:01, and at 9:02 the whole area became open because they hadn't paid the rent, right? Because that's what happens. So we raced up there at 9:05 and put our application in to get the whole area, right?
to buy it.
Not to buy it, to get it granted just by the government.
Okay.
So we had priority under the Act for all that area, right? But we didn't have all the work, millions of dollars of work that the Americans had done, you know, for 15 years on the thing. So I would have liked to have that too. So that night I had to meet with the guy who was coming from America to think he was going to find out when he was going to get paid. And I said, I had some good news. I had some bad news. I said, what do you want, the good news or the bad news first? He said, I have the good news. Because he thought what the good news was going to be, we got a big check. I said, the good news is that we're not going to sue you for breaching your option agreement and not keeping the tenement current, right? And we're not going to sue you. He said, what's the bad news? He said, bad news is that you didn't keep it current and we've now got it. That's the bad news from your point of view, but it's the good news from our point of view. So then there was a whole series. Hell broke loose. I had to have meetings with the government, with him, and there was fights on and litigation, and we started stuff. In the end of the day, they realised they couldn't win. So I gave them $3 million, I think, and they gave us all of the technical information, and that's how we got it. Mm-hmm. It's the biggest deposit in the world, right?
Yeah. CITIC gave you around 400 million for this deposit.
No,
and
not for the, no. You're on the wrong track.
Okay.
The deposit's 160 billion tons. We gave them, I think it was a right for 2 billion tons, of which they paid 400 million down payment, and they pay us royalties every year of about 600 or 700 million every year.
And they also spent around 12 billion.
15 billion now.
Constructing
they spent 50 billion, but that's another story, because the idea was that all of the iron ore that BHP and Rio sold to China was going to come from this deposit. We were going to expand it, right? And that's why BHP and Rio had to move quickly to try to stop it, right? Mm-hmm. That's why you had this. It's a long story.
But they're unsuccessful, obviously.
They're unsuccessful stopping that, but they're trying to stop the expansion, and they got the Western Australian government to act against the law in trying to stop it, because we had our own legislation in Western Australia, and we went through a 10-year arbitration thing, and it was going to be awarded that we were going to be awarded $60 billion in damages, and then the Western Australian government introduced an act of Parliament to exempt them from having to pay me $60 million. And in so doing, they breached the Australia Free Trade Agreement with Singapore, where my holding company is, and now they're facing about $200 billion bill in international arbitration.
So are you still in arbitration for that right now?
Yeah, we get a judgment, I think, in September on jurisdiction, and then I think we'll go on and get our damages, and then I won't be the richest person in Australia. I'll be the richest person in the world.
Well played. A round of applause.
Or something like that.
So how does the royalty deal work with China?
Well, they have to pay us a percentage of what they sell, what they mine every year. And it works that I get the royalty and I buy some cars and things, and then see what we can do to help people. I think we, with a food bank, we fed over 2 million meals to Australians that are hungry. At the moment, we've got 150,000 Australians homeless, and we've got 7.8 million Australians households only having one meal a day, right?
How come that cause is close to your heart?
Because I remember what it's like sleeping on the floor and paying $15 a week rent and sometimes not being able to pay it. And, I remember only having one meal a day. And, if you've gone through that experience in your life for a long time, you remember that, right?
Yeah.
And then I think of children and I think of, mothers and fathers and that. And I think of how sad and how hard it must be for someone who thinks from a male perspective, you're the provider for the family, you can't provide enough family for your children, you have to live in cars. That there's got to be more compassion in our society. Like, it would cost the government $200 million to eliminate the hunger problems in Australia. And that's nothing compared to their budget and what they want to spend on defence and other things, right? And that should be our first priority, to make sure our people have got something to eat. That's what I think, right?
When it comes to business, Clive, you were told by somebody that the iron ore deposit was worthless, and then you went to China and you did the deal. What did you say in that boardroom? How did you convince the Chinese to do the deal with you?
Well, first of all, you don't convince people in business. You've got to have the force has got to be with you, right? And of course, Peter Yitmar was a better professor than the people in Australia. He understood what the critical issues were. I could take you through and tell you, but it's pretty boring. It's about metallurgy, and it's about how you produce steel cheaper. But anyway,
tell us the business acumen, or the things you learned from that.
I relied on Peter.
Negotiating.
Right? I relied on Peter, but there's a number of technical and other reasons why magnetite's better than hematite, right? And the Australian companies didn't know that because they believed their own propaganda, right? So basically, Peter and I knew that our strengths, and we pointed out those strengths to the Chinese, and they agreed with us, and they put $15 billion behind that, right? And I'm sure they'd want to do more, right? So if they could, but so the problem is that you've got to have faith and confidence in your strength. So no one does business with you because they like you, right? That's the perception, I'm a really good guy, you'll love me, They won't give you billions of dollars just because they like you. Anything you earn really is because it gives them an advantage, or that they want that advantage. So you've got to be confident in that advantage. So when you go into that negotiation, you don't have any inhibitions. Like, I used to be friends with some of the top ministers in China and their former president and that, but they used to tell me all about Australian negotiators on the China Free Trade Agreement. I said that what their tactics were. I said, what were their tactics? And so the Chinese delegation would go in and they would smile and talk to them and say yes, 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 until they got to 10 minutes to 5. And then they'd say, no, this is how it has to happen. And all of the public servants would be looking at their watch. They'd have to get home. So it would put enormous pressure on them, and then they'd say, yes, we agree with you. Right? So that's a tactic.
Yeah.
Because they knew that, what's the most important thing for a public servant? To finish on time, get home and see his wife, feed the kids. He doesn't give a stuff about Australia.
What's some other things you learn about Chinese business in China that Westerners don't understand?
Well, that they don't have a strong emphasis on written agreements, right? Okay. Okay. They have an emphasis really on a relationship, and they say that anyway, but often it's just convenient because they don't want to honour a written agreement, right? So that they think it's a win-win situation. They always project a win-win situation, but they don't always mean a win-win situation. Sometimes they mean we win, you lose. But you have to be able to understand that and have another win-win situation that we win and they lose.
Yeah.
I think they've both won on the iron ore, right?
In 2009, Business Review Weekly named you as the richest person in Australia. Did that change how you felt about yourself and your accomplishments?
Well, I always thought I was the richest person in Australia when I got that girl to go out with me for dinner. I thought that that's what really matters.
Was that Sue?
Yeah, that was Sue. She's passed away now, unfortunately. But I always thought that. I thought I was the richest guy in Australia because I had everything I wanted. I wanted to go out with her. I wanted to, I thought I had a warm bed. I'd slept on the floor before, and I now had enough money in my real estate job to buy a good dinner. So what more could you want? And then you go outside, you've got the sunshine, so you've got to be happy. So that means I'm impregnable when it comes to negotiations. If you value money, you've got to value money in a sense, but I'm saying, but if you...
Put it above other things, maybe.
If that's your priority, right? You're going to give people a lever to control you, right? and they know they can't do that. So if I say I'll give you $100 million to do that, you say yeah, right? Well, you can't. You can't say it doesn't matter whether it's 100 million, whether it's a billion, or there's something like that. A business situation, it's whether it's the right thing for you, whether it's going to work. That's what really matters.
Important is to do the numbers and the due diligence as well.
Yeah, because you've got life. You've got people tend to think they've only got one opportunity in life, and they come across I've got to grab it, but that's not true. You can have more opportunities.
Do you think opportunities come to you, or do you think you create them?
I think at the moment they seem to come to me, because I suppose because people think I'm wealthy and all that sort of stuff, but they come to you. But I think you've got to create the angle on them. Like, I mean, I've delegated a lot of things for people to do, right? And they've stuffed them up, and I've had to sit back and do them myself. So I think, there is something to do with the individual talent. I must have some talent. I don't know what it is, but I don't saying that for acceptance, but I'm just saying that the results show that, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, so the results show.
Yeah,
they speak for themselves.
But I think God's on my side. I think that's an important thing.
Are you a religious man?
I believe in God. I believe He's on my side because I do the right thing. I don't do anything that's drastically wrong, I don't think. And so just last week we found out that one of our employees stole $30 million from us, but then we get it back through a guarantee fund. So everyone says, "Oh, you must be upset, the breach of trust." I said, "Well, I just get another $30 million I didn't think I was going to get."
Yeah.
So that's pretty good, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, definitely.
So how can you be upset about that? When everyone else would be angry about that, they think, "Oh, what a rat! I'm a dog," and you'd flip yourself over to a negative way of thinking. And you might find you might be so negative in thinking that way for 2 or 3 years and upset about it that it'll cost you a real opportunity, right? You can't worry about your past. It's gone. You can worry about the present and the future. And so many people live their life through the past, trying to like you get someone that says, "Well, I should have done senior. I didn't do senior. So when I was 26, I went back and did senior." Suddenly it doesn't matter anymore because who cares if someone 26 has done senior studies or if you've done a degree, or they try to go back and do what they didn't do. You've just got to say, I am who I am now, and I've got to go forward, Same with a relationship. If you've broken up and it's destroyed your life, you can't let it destroy your life. You've got to let it go forward.
Keep moving forward, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of the past, in 2009, you were hailed as a massive hero in Townsville. You took on Queensland Nickel, you saved thousand jobs, but then by 2016 it kind of collapsed. And it is known in the media that you took 189 million out of that company. Mm. How come you didn't just pay some of it back and avoid all the public backlash that was going on?
Well, firstly, let's look at the real Queensland Nickel story, right? BHP decided in 2009, I think it was, 2008 or something like that, to get rid of BHP and sack everyone, right? So we went up there and we took it over. The next year we made $250 million profit, right? I gave to staff 25 Mercedes-Benz for their good work.
Which models, by the way?
I think they're a B model, A model, one of those, nice. 25 of them. I gave that to staff, and I gave 1,450 holidays for everyone working at the plant to go to Fiji, right?
Amazing, very generous.
I didn't have to do that, I did all that, right? And then we had people who had just come on working for the last 4 weeks, so I gave all them a holiday at somewhere like Marina Mirage or somewhere like that in Queensland. I forgot where it was, but they had a holiday with their family, right? And I remember we had a lot of guys came up and wanted me to give them extra money instead of giving the holiday, but all the wives wanted the holiday, so I kept the holiday on because I said they need to have some time with their family. So that was a good story, and we made $250 million profit. So naturally, I took $189 million out of the company or something like that. 190. That's part of the profit I made. We're not in business for love, right? Okay. So, I mean, that's at that time. It's at that time. And then I put my nephew up there to run it, Clive Mensink, and he courageously made a lot of decisions that BHP and that wouldn't have made and kept the thing going for 6 more years. And that kept over 1,000 people employed, their families, and having futures for 6 more years. Then the nickel price dropped really, really low, right? And when we took over the Queensland Nickel from BHP, we didn't realise it, but when I checked into it, we had all the super requirements they didn't pay. They left them in the company. So it was another $200 million or something, a bit less than that, I think, to pay when we wound up the company, right? So we had to put it into receivership, right? And there was a 100 and something bill, and that was paid by the Commonwealth Government under the guarantee scheme. So we then went back to the receiver and offered him a cheque to reimburse the Commonwealth, right? And he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't take it. He went through courts with us and fought it for 2 years until ultimately we did a settlement with the federal government directly and paid that money. So we've paid all the money to all of the workers. That's the reality of it, right? But of course, at that time, I made a mistake. I was in politics. I was in the federal parliament. We held the balance of power in Australia. And the Labor Party people and the Liberals were all on us, because the laws couldn't change in the country unless we agreed to them. So it became political. So there's a real message there. Don't mix politics with business.
You almost died at one point. We're given 5 hours to live. What did you see in those 5 hours or experience that most will never experience?
Well, what happened was I had double pneumonia in Sydney, and I came back to Queensland. I caught COVID, right? So at that time, people were dying with COVID and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't believe in the vaccine, right? I could take it for a whole lot of reasons with that. And they had this drug called remdesivir, which was what Pfizer was giving, and about 70% of people that took remdesivir died.
Was that to help them get over it?
Well, allegedly it was, but it really killed them, I think, right? So I had that view anyway, right or wrongly. So I went in there, and these two guys said, "Oh, yeah, oxygenation's this. You've only got 5 hours to live." He said, "So will you take remdesivir?" I said, "No, I don't want to take it." And they said, "We're going to have to hold you down and give it to you." I said, "I don't think so." And so I picked up the chair, and they all ran out of the room. They're gutless. And anyway, so what happened then was then the nurse came in, and she said, "There's 100 media have arrived here at the hospital. They want to know what's wrong with you." And they're going through all the doors, opening, and they only had one security guard trying to find me.
Who was it? The press?
The press, yeah. So she said, "I've got to take you away somewhere." So they took me to a part of the hospital which was under construction to hide me from the media. Now, this is my last countdown to living, 5 hours, according to the doctors. So I thought, well, I just had to think. So, if you're in that position, you'd want to think too. I rang up my wife because I thought if I only had 5 hours left to live, I wanted to spend them with her. Right?
That's sweet.
So then she came to the back of the hospital and picked me up. And all this was being live broadcast over Australia. Right? I didn't know that. But this doctor saw it, and he was running a trial for ivermectin to treat COVID. And he rang me on the phone, and he said his daughter had the treatments for me, and she was rushing to my house to meet me to take them immediately. Right? So I took them. And next day I was feeling better. I had them for another 2 days. And then there was no COVID at all. I was completely cured, right? And ivermectin, you could have, that's just me, but ivermectin, you could have just, it was a drug that cost half a cent or something to manufacture.
Wasn't it a anti-malaria drug?
No, it's used for a lot of things. Mm-hmm. It's if you go to the World Health, it's one of the basic medicines of the world, right? Now, in India, and Afghanistan, they didn't have any money. They couldn't afford vaccines. So they had a population of 214 million people, and they just used ivermectin on everybody, and only 14 people died. Right?
Amazing.
Amazing. So, that you just can't, it's just true. I know my own life, it's true. Right?
Yeah.
And, of course, our government and all that was just taking a lot of taxpayers' money, giving it to the pharmaceutical companies, not in the public interest, and they were killing people. Because there's no question that the vaccine did kill a number of people, right? There's about 20 million, they think, worldwide, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it was a great crime against our country. I brought Professor McCulloch and a whole team of people out. We did a national tour, I think it was last year or the year before, and which was sold out everywhere we went, right? Showing people that what the truth was, right? And of course, the politicians don't like it. The government doesn't like it because they're all complicit in it, right? And they had the vaccine inquiry in the Senate. Our senator got that up. But then they closed it down. They wouldn't take submissions because they didn't want it to be exposed, right? I can understand that to a point. A lot of those people may have acted in good faith. And certainly
they may have had a lot of fear in themselves even about their own.
Yeah, well, they mightn't know. They won't know these things, right?
Yeah.
But it's very dangerous, I think, But money can become very dangerous when it does with things like that because, in Pfizer, there's 1,200 people who all had more than $10 million of bonuses out of the vaccine. And Pfizer made $70 billion a year profit on that, right? So that's where you get greed and overtaking ethics, right? And then, they set up all of the medical bodies in Australia that were being funded by Pfizer, right, to make decisions to do all of this, right? And we've got all that down. But I can't devote my life to everything, so I couldn't. I couldn't do that. I did what we could. So,
what did you learn from the near-death experience?
Love conquers all. If you also, to do and to do what you think is the right thing to do, because I knew it was wrong for me to take remdesivir. I knew that that wouldn't help me. I knew there must be some other way, and then I had faith that God would help me, and He did.
Yeah.
Right? So I wasn't going to back down. That's what it boiled down to, right? So that's what I learned, I guess. But it's a very sad thing for the people that suffered, right? And there are a lot of people that are still suffering from it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's a lesson to learn, really.
Definitely do your own research and not be too complicit.
Yeah.
Not be 100% complicit.
That's right.
Do you think anyone can become a billionaire?
I don't know. It's never been my objective, right? It's not too significant either way, right?
But do you think anyone can do it?
Yeah, I think.
Or do you think it takes a special type of person?
Well, I think you need to, at this stage of my life, I'd say I think you need to have restraint, and you need to be able to have your priorities clear in your life to even enter the race. You know, you can't enter the race based on what the perception of life is about, right? Like the perception of money or business or anything like that, or you can't be too overly impressed by material things, even though that sounds crazy, because a lot of them are, right? Although a lot of billionaires that are, right? For my story anyway, I found I had to have restraint, right? And judgment. And I think you have to think about things. I think you have to appreciate the present. I mean, a lot of us don't think in the present, you know? We think in the past, and we try to relate back to things in the past. But you've got to think in the present, and you've got to think about the future. And so what do I want to do? And you've got to be able to work that out and take control of that yourself. And that requires you to be very calm. I'm always projecting in the media as someone flustered, hopeless, you know, that sort of thing. But I'm not really, right? I think about what I want to do and I stay calm. Even you think of all the things that have happened to me in my life, people attacking me, different points. It's never affected me because I know there's no basis for it, you know?
You do have a very strong presence in the media. With everything that's happened in your life, you still show up, you still answer questions no matter what's going on in your private life or your business life. So I do find that very admirable. Do you weaponize litigation, or is it just part of being a big fish?
Well, no, it's just part of life. I mean, if someone comes up to you and say, like in Western Australia, they had to bring an act of parliament in to try to take all my assets from me, right? That's what they decided to do. So if someone did that to you, you'd think that was wrong, wouldn't you? So you go to the High Court, and the High Court's all stacked anyway, especially when it comes to that level of damages. So they think it was wrong. But then if it breaches international treaties and you had a right to get recourse there, why wouldn't you do it? You know?
Yeah.
If someone took your house off you, your home off you, would you just sit there and take it?
No way. No.
You know? So I just pursue my rights. Now, if I get a lot of money, and you know, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, I get a lot of money from damages or for things like that, well, I only get what I deserve. You know? No judges or courts are going to give you anything unless they're 100% sure you're entitled to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got to say also, everyone should have the right to, you know, take a dispute to court, because what's the alternative? You live in a jungle, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you've helped a lot of people with donating to food banks.
Yeah.
What would you do if you only had $1,000 in your bank account? Think of the people in today's age.
What would I do? Well, I just think it's people are in different situations, I guess, you know. I don't think I'd put it on the horses, you know, and that's what a lot of them do, right? They get desperate. They put it on the horses, or they put it in casinos.
The casinos,
yeah, or stuff like that, because they're desperate. They buy a lottery ticket with it, you know. I don't think that's the way to go. That's desperation. So I've been in a situation where I've never had $1,000, right? That would have been a lot of money to me, you know. So I think I'd have to, if I was married, I had kids, and I had the responsibilities, you'd have to preserve it for them. And that's what a lot of Australians are doing. They're having one meal a day or half a meal a day. They're trying to buy things that are cheaper. Yeah, there's a whole lot of things we should be doing. There's a lot of like seconds in vegetables and food and all that could go to hungry people that it's thrown away and waste all the time.
Yeah.
You know?
That would make a great
and the
charity.
Labor Party stopped that happening. I mean, the National Party, to their credit, they had a situation where if you've got seconds, you know, like you're a farmer, and you dispose of them, that's tax deductible, right? But if you give them away to people to eat, it's not, right? So you have to dispose of them. Yeah. Otherwise you don't get the deduction in your business. So
it should be the other way around. It
should be, yeah. And the National Party tried to raise this in the Senate before the last election, and the Labor Party and the Liberals stopped it, right? They tried to raise it for farmers, but it just makes common sense.
Yeah, totally.
Just makes common sense. So now we've got our farmers destroying our produce, which is still good enough to eat, but it might have a bruise on it or something, right? because otherwise, as businesses, they can't survive. You know, government gives $1 million a year to food bank. $1 million. That's really generous. I gave them much more than that, right? So all
How
those
much did
things
you give?
I think I gave them $5 million myself to food bank, but we'll do more. After we do this arbitration with the government, we'll provide a lot more money because that's coming up soon. They're going to lose that. Yeah?
So you get the money from the government, then you reallocate it to causes that you think are important.
Yeah, that's right. Be like a bit like Robin Hood. You know, he's set a good example for us in history to do that. So you know, everyone says, "Oh, Clive's suing the government for 300 billion." Well, I'm only suing them for 300 billion because that's the damage they caused me. And if you go to JP Morgan's valuations for BH Rio and their iron ore business to China, it's all about that amount of money. And I'm entitled to be in the position I would have been in if that had happened. Now, when I get that money, what's important is what do you do with it? If you can provide, you know, more food for people, if you can come up with solutions for housings for Australians, right? Why not do? The government's not going to do it. You know, I mean, it's just going to go to more public servants and into a big black hole.
Even if the government did, it would take a long time. It takes time to change policy and to get these wheels in motion. You said before, if somebody had $1,000, don't bet it on the horses and don't go gambling. You suggested that's not wise. What can they do about their mindset? They're literally struggling. How can they shift their mindset and strategically get back on top?
Well, I think they've got to stay calm, right? And I think they've got to look at a couple of things, like realistically, everyone wants to live in the cities, right? So I've got a wife and family and kids. What I want is a happy life for my children, and I want them to have some security and some work. There's a lot of jobs available in rural communities. There's a lot of cheaper housing, and there's a lot of opportunities to have a stable life, right? So do I want to live here? Maybe because I'm chasing something, for me, which could be selfish, maybe I'm better to relocate. I mean, it's hard to say what would you do because I don't know what situation they faced. But I would know if I had $1,000, I had a wife and child and that, I'd want to go perhaps to Western Queensland or Northern Queensland or somewhere where there was a community. I could still relate to people. They could still have a community safely to go out in. I could afford that where I could maybe get a job because I haven't got enough people to work up there. When I was in Parliament, I had to deal with Scott Morrison. We had the balance of power in the Senate. And he wanted to bring in 5-year visas for refugees, right? And then send them back to wherever they came from, yeah? And he needed our votes to do that. So I went down, Scott Morrison asked me to come down and talk about it with him. And I said, now look, we've got an idea, right? And if you implement our idea with your idea, we'll pass it in the Senate. And our idea was to have safe enterprise visas with these other visas he wanted, right? And a safe enterprise visa was if you as a individual decided not to take any government assistance, but to go to work somewhere else, anywhere in Australia, right? And you supported yourself for 5 years, then you could stay as a citizen, right? And of course, we had about 80,000 jobs that couldn't be filled in rural areas in Australia at that time. And one of the problems that happened, you're getting a lot of people with a lot of hate all together in sort of ghettos in the cities, causing problems. So we needed to absorb them in other communities, right? And we needed to give them an opportunity, right? So he agreed to that. And they had safe enterprise visas, you know. If you give people an opportunity and a chance, right? Because we had a lot of these people.
They work hard.
And a lot of these people have left their countries because what would you do if you're in that country? What would you do if you had your children that had the same repression that he had?
I'd be hustling hard. I'd be on the first plane or boat out of there.
So we shouldn't be condemning those people necessarily. There might be a lot of people in there that are bad people too, right? But we can't judge people as a block. We've got to talk about the individuals, and then we've got to provide them with the opportunity. To be able to work is a real benefit. It's a real thing that you can't be said, I've got to go to work today. I don't want to get out of bed. Then you're in the downward spiral. But you get up, breathe the air in. I had a shower this morning. Go out there, you feel good. You know?
Ultimately, if somebody's employing you, they're taking a risk by building that business in the first place. And so be grateful for the money you get, whatever amount it is, for the job you're doing.
It's money, but it's also experience. You know, it's also things. Every day you meet new people and you come across new different perspectives. You know, so life's got a lot to offer, but you've got to see it in that perspective. You've got to see it. You can't say, I'm coming down today to a podcast, some deadbeat. They have to interview, what's it like,
Are you saying I'm a deadbeat?
No, you say I'm a deadbeat. I'm saying, you've got to look, I'm just giving you an example. You've got to look at life, at what it is, and what it can be. Right? Mm-hmm. To be alive is an opportunity to serve other people. That's what it's about. You don't necessarily have to have anything, right? You can still be happy, I mean, look at me. I buy all my clothes This is my pants I got from Connor for $29. I got this for a $12 shirt from Connor. So I'm here in my outfit, high fashion.
You look great, by the way.
I'm here in my outfit for $34.
I think your belt cost more than the outfit.
Well, the belt did, that cost me 120. Was it Williams or something? No.
Yeah, Williams.
Is it Williams? Yeah, without 120. Yeah. My socks are only $3. But I remember I was in Parliament one time and I had all the press around me, and I was a bit of a national figure.
A treasure.
A treasure. I was elected as a national treasure.
National treasure.
Yeah, that people of Australia voted me a national treasure. But I was in Parliament. There's 150 people there. And I hopped out there to go into Parliament. All the press gather at the room to ask. I said, Clive, what's the news today? What's the news? Tell us some news. What's it all about? What are you going to do today? What's happening? And I couldn't think of anything to say because it was just a normal day. I was just going to go in. I said, well, actually, today I'm wearing red underpants. They said, what? I said, yeah, I'm wearing red underpants.
Were they lace?
No, they weren't lace. But I just said that to them as a fun, just to say how ridiculous they were. Anyway, next day, Palmer wears red underpants for Parliament, right? Everything happening in Australia, who knows what's going on, but I wore red underpants to Parliament, and they didn't even see them, right?
They didn't even know.
They didn't verify. They didn't verify.
They didn't do their research properly, those journalists.
So I'm just saying, how can you... I don't know. It's a mad, mad world. But that was a movie, Mad, Mad World. I saw that. It was great. It is. It's a mad world.
It's important to enjoy life and have a laugh.
Yeah.
What do you perceive as the next big opportunities in Australia? You had your little you had your forecasting globe when it came to mineralogy. So what's the next big opportunity in Australia?
Well, it's very difficult in Australia because when you look at now I know what I know in my life that I didn't know when I was younger. I guess is that a lot of if you look at jobs, just jobs for most people, look at jobs. 82% of all jobs created in the last 3 years are in the public sector. That means in government, right? That's a really dangerous thing because you really mean you've got 22% jobs being created in the private sector. It's only the private sector, the non-government sector, that gives you the tax to run the government, right? So if you get a situation where expenditure in the government becomes bigger than what's being created here, it's like a seesaw and the whole thing collapses, right? And that's what's happening now, like this will be very controversial when I say this, but I should say it to get some more viewers. Like when I was growing up, you'd have a benefit, benefit from the government. Like it was unemployment benefit, it was sickness benefit, it was the old age pension, right? But everyone would get the same amount of benefit, right? Of course, you're all Australians, right? Now with the NDIS, they've changed that. And NDIS's budget is now bigger than the defence budget, Medibank, and the education budget added together, right? And some people are being spent $200,000, $300,000, and I know one that's had $3 million. But you can't do that. It's not sustainable, right? And it's going to cause a lot of probably at the same time you've got pensioners living on the pension, right? And so and there's a whole mix of that. Now, if you take my hairdresser, I had she was earning $65,000 as a hairdresser, and she said, "Oh, Clive, I won't be able to do your hair anymore." I said, "Oh, why? It looks so good, She said because I've taken a job as a carer at the NDIS. She said, I have to do it. She said, I get $215,000 a year. She gets $215,000 a year. She said, there's a base, and I can earn up to $400,000 for overnight stays and things.
That's insane.
Yeah. Anyway, I go to work that day, and our accountant in office comes in. He's earning about $400,000 a year at his job, right? He said, I've got to resign, sorry, today, because my wife's a nurse, and she set up one of these referral agencies at the NDIS, right? And now she's getting $6 million a year.
Oh.
Right? She's getting $6 million a year. So I'm going to help her doing that, right? I said, how's she getting $6 million a year? She said, oh, it's great. He said, we go along and assess people that need help. He said, and we get 10% of the amount we assess them at every year.
A little conflict of interest?
No. So what they do is they go along and they give them everything they can think of. Because the bigger that they get, the more money that they get.
Of course.
Right? And that's what's happened. And then if you look at the country, you'll have heard people say we don't get enough waiters. It's hard to get waiters for it's hard to get construction workers because they're all carers. I'm not criticising the individuals for taking their opportunity, and it's not also to criticise the people that are getting their help. Although if you have a disability, I've got a friend, close friend, who's 66. When he fell off the roof and became a paraplegic, he gets nothing because over 65, if you incur your disability, you're excluded from the NDIS.
Why is that?
I don't know.
That doesn't seem fair.
Because he's 66. And him and his wife are really struggling. They can need some help.
What's your take on legacy? You don't seem too big on naming buildings after yourself or statues.
I don't think there's anything like legacy, because when you're dead, you're dead. It's not going to benefit me. But I mean, you just do what you think's right while you're alive. That's all you can do, really. You don't want to have an ego bigger than who you are, right?
Do you need a level of ego in business to make things happen?
Well, some people do, right? I don't. Everyone thinks I've got the biggest ego in Australia, right? They do. They do. If you talk to people, that's what they would say. That there'd be perception, but I don't think I've got any ego, right?
Who's the most powerful person you have in your phone contact?
I can't tell you because I'd make a headline if I told you.
Okay.
I gave $20 million or something to the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. I'm off to have dinner with the Duke of Edinburgh at St James's Palace in November to discuss all of that, right?
What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought and then instantly regretted?
My boat. No.
Beautiful boat.
I don't know. Not my boat. I don't know. I've never regretted anything, really. You can't get anything out of regretting something. It's gone, right? You've lost it all.
Or maybe something you purchased and then thought,
Well, one thing did happen to me with my wife. She went to an auction to buy a house. She wanted to buy a house. And I think I gave her a budget of $2 million for this house. She went off to buy it. It ended up costing her $3 million, right? But, what happened during the auction, I should have gone with her because she started bidding against herself. She was the leading bidder at 2.3 million, and then she kept on bidding against herself. And she bid it up to 3 million. And the bloody auctioneer took it, right?
So she didn't quite understand the process, perhaps?
No, it ended up $700,000 she paid more for the house. Now, I wasn't worried that she bought the house for $3 million, but I just thought it was just crazy that we ended up paying $700,000 for it. So I suppose that's something that I say I regret that I didn't, not actually buy. I didn't go with her. Just not actually to save the money, but just actually to help her understand that's how you do it, right? But I thought it's better for women to do these things themselves so they learn, don't you?
I'm sure she learned. I'm sure she learned, for sure.
She did learn that message. She remembers that message. I'm pretty sure of that, right?
When was the last time you cried?
I guess, I cried when I think about, what's happening overseas and so many children and people being killed in all different situations in Ukraine, right? In the Middle East, right? And other places like that. That's something worth crying about, I don't cry very much, only when it's worthwhile. And I think that's something we're all going to consider, how we can make the world a better place and stop wars, because wars are really just the end of the economic system as it is. I mean, like if you take the United States, for example, they were the world's biggest manufacturer up to about 1992. Today, China's the biggest manufacturer. They are a manufacturing superpower, and that means that they manufacture more than the next 9 countries. So they really are big. America now manufactures about 9% of the world, and China manufactures 31%. So, but US finances are pretty bad, so they've got to sort out some way of rebalancing their economy, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, with NATO, everyone has to buy the same weapons. They're all going to buy them from the United States, and that gives them a lot more money. Right?
They're not cheap weapons.
No, not. It gives them a lot more money. Remember, I said, ask me the question about climate change.
Here we are, climate change. Let's go.
Let's put aside for a minute whether climate change is real or not real. Just forget about that at the moment, right? But climate change eventuated from the United States. That's where it was all to start with, right? It then invaded Europe. It's invaded all the world. People have got that view. But what the Europeans have done now, they've said electric cars in 2035, no more petrol cars, they're out, right?
That's why you've got 1,000 cars in your collection.
That's right. Yeah. But America hasn't done that, right? If you go back, Jimmy Carter, 1980s, is the oil crisis. They couldn't get enough oil. So now all the oil and petroleum that was going to Europe is no longer going to Europe. It's going to the United States. The market's much bigger. The price comes down, and that means cheaper energy for the United States. Who does the United States compete with in manufacturing? Europe, right? Europe's costs have now gone up 300%, right? So their jobs will go down, their societies will decline, right? And of course, the United States will be the beneficiary of that, right? And so will China, right? That's the real story about climate change.
They say that climate change has been studied by scientists and it's real.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's been studied by some scientists. They say there's other scientists that say it's not real. But I wasn't going to get into the real and non-real debate. I was just going to say that if you want to bring your government accountable to what's happening, you've got to deal with what's happening now and say in the next generation.
So to finish up, Clive, what advice do you have to business owners who in today's economy may be struggling,
Yeah.
and they want to get ahead and they want to do more for their employees, for their family, for the community? When they're faced with challenges, what can they do with their mindset and with their business strategy?
Well, first of all, don't be afraid to admit you failed at something, right? That's one of the biggest faults of people in business. I mean, I've failed at many things in my life, but I've recognised that. I've moved on and gone somewhere different. A lot of people can't take failure. They can't move beyond it. They say they don't want to. They think they're doing a test with themselves and their failures as people. But you can fail for a lot of reasons. You can fail because it's the wrong timing, the wrong market, a whole lot of these things. It doesn't mean you're bad, right? So don't be too hard on yourself, but you know, you don't want to give up if you've got a good chance either. But don't be frightened to say I failed at something, right? If you don't have a good opinion of yourself, you can't expect other people to, right? And then you are a valuable person. Every individual on this planet is unique, and you've got unique things, but everyone has different experiences. And don't put your success as a human being. I know you'll disagree with me on this one, but don't put your success as a human being with just commercial success. I mean,
And your self-worth.
Your self-worth. Yeah, I mean, like I'm probably good at business and that, but doesn't mean I'm a good person, right? Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Just like you're an artist or something like that. That's a skill, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
So that's all I should say. So don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself a good kiss. You know, it's a bit hard to kiss yourself, but you can try.
In the mirror, maybe.
In the mirror, yeah.
Each morning with a pep talk.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. There's one last thing I really want to do with you, Clive.
Yeah.
Have you ever done a Tim Tam slammer?
No, I'm totally against Tim Tams. Personally, I don't recommend them for people.
That's not what I've seen in the media.
No, the media's a beat up. They try to go at me with Tim Tams, but you know, if I ate a Tim Tam now, I would be in a lot of trouble. Even though you got a Tim Tam slam there, she's getting it out now. I can see it, but she's a bit.
Well, turn the cameras off. Turn the cameras off.
No. Keep the cameras on. But I think Tim Tams are very good, but they teach us a lot. Tim Tams, they teach us not to be tempted. To be able to resist temptation, right? To be an individual and have some sort of fortitude inside. So although I'd like to have a Tim Tam, although I'd love to have a Tim Tam, I'd really be ecstatic to have a Tim Tam. I'm not going to have one, right?
Have you ever done a Tim Tam slammer though?
Yeah, I have. That's with cream and stuff like that. Is that what you mean?
No, you get the Tim Tam and you bite one end and then you bite the other end, just a little amount, and then you can drink the milk through the Tim Tam.
My God, I could never do that. I'd die.
No, it's just one.
Yeah, but I couldn't drink the milk. Where's the milk been? Is it goat's milk?
No.
Cow's milk? What is it? Is it human milk? What sort of milk is it?
I brought some milk. It's sealed. You can have your team assess it, make sure that it's okay.
I couldn't do that. I'll say no to that. I'll say yes to the podcast, no to the Tim Tam, right?
The slammer.
I'll say no to the slammer. But anyway.
No worries.
But thanks very much for coming to visit my boat, and thank you for watching. God bless you all. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Clive, for your time.
See you. Bye.